Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Destination Day here at the ITB. We have another very exciting session for you, this time on the sharing economy, which is obviously sort of influencing how we live, travel, work, and today we have some experts here that will tell you a little bit about this in numbers, and then there'll be a very interesting panel discussion on how we take this deeper and what some of the conflict points and challenges are for destinations, as well as the opportunities. So before we get started with the presentation, a quick question for you. Can we have the next live voting question, please? The music is already there. If you haven't been here this morning, if you reach down to your right or left of your chair, there should be a voting button for you. Where are you staying during ITB? Are you in private accommodation? Are you at a hotel? Or are you from Berlin and staying at home? So please, get your clickers out and vote now, as soon as the dramatic music starts. Here it comes. Okay, the hotels are still winning this game, so let's see what the next group of experts can tell us about this. I'd like to introduce you first to Dirk Rogl, who's a research analyst at Phocuswright. He will first give a short presentation to set the frame, and then he will ask two panelists to join him on stage to discuss how this impacts destinations. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Dirk Rogl from Phocuswright.
Thanks, David.
All yours.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for joining Full House. It's a fascinating topic, it's a challenging topic, so of course it's Full House. I hope it remains full just because this is the one and only and first Phocuswright presentation ever in German, so I switch now to German language, so in case you missed your headsets, it's time now, and by the way, herzlich willkommen, meine Damen und Herren.
A very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Phocuswright in German. We do a lot of research in multiple areas. Particularly, we try to develop all the topics surrounding trends, accommodation, private accommodation, sharing economy, platforms, etc. Let's look at a couple of details. And without further ado, I'd like to pull up my study. Well, let's see if somebody can help me, because I've brought you some facts and figures to walk you through the topic. Well, let's look at the market and how it breaks down. Private accommodation, what does it subsume? What does it mean? What does it spell out in Europe? And I can already reveal that it is not entirely new. It is a market that has always existed. When you've already witnessed that 20% have always been accommodated in private accommodations, perhaps not Airbnbs, but for example, trade fair hostels have always existed, private hostels, and there are other possibilities that exist in Germany that are not as ubiquitous, for example, the Hotel Garni system and others. But it is a tourist area that we're not entirely familiar with in the global area. But I really would like to give you some facts and figures now. Okay, here we go. Let's get started. Hello. What is new in Europe? Back to facts and figures. Here you can see in the clear area the growth rates of private accommodation and compared to hotels in the darker colored area. You can see that we have a growth ranging from 20 to roughly 35 billion euros, meaning that the share of private accommodation is growing steadily in Europe, but also hotels and commercial accommodation are growing. You can say that private accommodation is a strong growth market, but that has not led to a situation where hotels would be on a downslide as a consequence. As I already said, what is private accommodation? Let's try and define it. It's extremely diverse. It's very, very interesting. At Phocuswright, we call it, it feels like home. It has that homey feeling to it. That doesn't really say a lot, but it offers a bit more than hotels. It's something that is unique. For example, vacation homes, villas in Europe, very, very present, much more than in the US. Those are urban rentals, for example, city dwellings, area that we should talk about. And last but not least, if you were in the rural area, we also have private accommodation, pensions, bed and breakfasts, etc. And at Phocuswright, we subsume that under the heading, the end of alternative accommodation. It's no alternative accommodation. It is something that has established itself in Europe, much more than in the United States. It is a market that has always existed in Europe, as I said at the beginning. But things are changing. If you look at the growth rates in terms of online bookings, started very low in 2010. The share was roughly 5 billion euros in Europe, and up to 2020, we expect this to increase to 30 billion euros, meaning that, or actually 31 billion, meaning that we do expect that online penetration increases. And that's certainly not a surprise. The classic brick and mortar is melting away, but we're witnessing that same phenomenon in other sectors as well. Something else, so the Airbnb effect. The location rental management companies, the VRMCs, they are no longer that important. Private accommodation is increasingly being rented out by the owner themselves. RBO, rented by owner. And you can see that the share of RBO is increasing from 37 to more than 60% by 2020. So we have platforms such as Airbnb that offer this opportunity, but also others use this opportunity to rent out their own property. But the agencies, the VRMCs, are also increasing 1% over 10 years, but they will continue to exist. The market as a whole continues to grow. So what about the German market? This is probably the market that you're most interested in. Well, on the one hand side, you could say this is the largest private accommodation market. In terms of demand, it generates more or less 23% of overnight stays in Europe at roughly 8 billion euros. The entire market in 2016 was 35 billion euros. Those are staggering figures. It's not surprising that together with the UK, we are obviously the largest market within that scenario. But it becomes even clearer if you look at the differences. Breaking it down to the fulfillment forms, i.e. how accommodations are being booked and how they are being paid. So everything takes place via the internet. If you look at Germany, in this case, you see that there is quite a large gap compared to other countries. In 2011, in Germany, 17% of holiday accommodations were paid via the internet. In 2016, this had risen to 37%. But just as in Spain, if you compare that to Spain or to other European markets, in particular the UK, you see that there's still quite a long way to go. And perhaps there is a lack of trust on the part of the users, a lack of infrastructure perhaps. It is certainly also, it's also brick and mortar commerce, because particularly when it comes to payment. So what is the Airbnb effect? And to what extent does it affect Germany? Here we have a couple of revealing figures. You can see the red bar, that is Airbnb, and the others are classical travel agencies, TripAdvisor, Home and Away, VR portals, and other portals, vacation home rentals. And you can see that the share of Airbnb still has some way to go there. There's some potential in Germany. We have roughly 15% of holidaymakers that book via Airbnb, and it is not as well established and fully developed as in other markets. But what are the real Airbnb effects? And those are figures, and of course you know that we don't have that many figures or numbers provided by Airbnb. These are the app downloads from the American market. We did this last year with Utopia, and you can see that you see the download numbers of the 10 largest hotels in the United States. And if you just look at the visual impact. People downloading their app on the smartphone, and that means that there's, and if you look at the Airbnb download, it's much larger. That means that there's also certain retention potential there. So as far as customers are concerned, Airbnb seems to be well ahead, and also in Europe they seem to be doing a good job. So how did they go about that? So this is a song of praise to Airbnb, in a way. On the one hand side, it's very, very easy, absolutely intuitive. You have perfect visibility on the website itself, and they're very well designed. Pictures are excellent to really outstanding, and it's very nicely designed. And you can also book it through Airbnb. You have the 37% that actually pay via Airbnb, and availabilities are clarified, and it's a bit better, I'd say, or rises certainly beyond what other European offers have. And there's another point, that is the host. Everything hinges on the host at Airbnb, and that is something that Airbnb has really perfectly encapsulated in their formula, and that is certainly something that gives this product, the overnight accommodation, a different perspective and a different quality. And Airbnb has perhaps also created a different type of traveler. It has a certain impact on the market, well designed, very effective. The Airbnb traveler asks other types of questions than the classical hotel traveler. You can look that up. And Airbnb is not just an overnight stay on some mattress on the bed, and everything can be booked via Airbnb. The classic hotel without any particular features, low frills, but you can also book boutique hotels, and since last year, additional features, because accommodation is not everything. It's about experiences. You can book excursions. Other add-ons will come on. Even a very own airline has been talked about. Rumors abound, but it's not just about private accommodation or overnight stay. It is well underway to become an encompassing travel platform, and to what extent that will go is certainly something that the future will reveal. So it's very, very relevant from our perspective. The product that you are familiar with will only be the minority, actually, of the overall package going forward. I don't know whether the experience is already part of this, but I'm really looking forward to finding out what these add-ons will be. And that's something that we will be talking about now. What does the future hold for Airbnb? What will it have as an impact on the entire sector? How relevant will it be for the destinations, for the target markets? How relevant is all this for our entire sector? I'm looking forward to the debate. I'd like to welcome Alexander Schwarz, the General Manager for the German language region in Germany, for Airbnb, that is. Welcome, and Burkhard Kieger, who is the Managing Director of Visit Berlin, Berlin Tourism. A very warm welcome to you too. Please, have a seat, gentlemen. So I just read out quite a number of figures, and we also received a figure from the audience. 20% of those present here have booked via private accommodation. Perhaps not everyone booked via Airbnb. You do have a couple of competitors left, right? This is certainly more than other figures in the market. Current surveys, for example, exist that say that only 1.3% of corporate travelers book via Airbnb, but we're all corporate travelers. Is this a one-off, this situation, or how important is the business travel market segment for you? Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us here, for inviting us, and that we can sit together here on stage. Probably you're more familiar with the questions I'm myself here, but you're an expert, as I say. But the business travel sector is not really separate from the leisure segment, because we're all traveling here, and we all want to have an excellent travel experience. That's what we focus on. And when it comes to the product, of course, we try to differentiate a bit, try to cater to the business traveler and what the leisure traveler needs. Sometimes you need different elements there. That's what we try to accommodate. But both areas are more and more overlapping, i.e. the business traveler wants to extend a stay for a weekend and engage in leisure activities, so it's not just the typical 2.5 days that are booked, but 4.5 days, for example, including the weekend in the respective destinations. But it's always about the travel experience itself. To be able to feel at home, regardless as to where you travel, and you want to have certain aspects in place there. Mr. Kika, yes, will you travel? Yes, yes. Yes, Eastern, yes, I will be traveling. Private, yes. I can also imagine doing that once the children are grown up and are no longer traveling with us. But I have already engaged in home sharing, especially if you have children. That is a good opportunity to book your holidays. Well, I talked about the specifics of the German market. We always had private accommodation in one form or another, but to what extent is private accommodation important for you, and particularly important also for the market here in Berlin? Well, home sharing is extremely important for us, because we believe that is absolutely that really fits and behooves a young and open city, an active city like ours. And you just said that the hotels haven't really suffered as a consequence of the increase in the share of private accommodation. Both segments are actually growing and are participating equally in the market. And as such, it is a very, very modern and digital way. It is quite appealing, and we do see that quite a large number of traditional providers are increasingly jumping on the bandwagon. Therefore, I would believe that you've done everything right in that sense. Well, we'll be talking about the misappropriation of use in a way, or the change of use in that sense, that is not entirely appropriate. But Airbnb entered the market in a very particular way, perhaps also in a different way than America and other places. Well, home sharing is not something that we invented. That is something that has always existed, and fortunately enough, it has existed for a very long time. The only thing that we've done is to create a digital platform that can establish the bond of trust between the host and the guest and the traveler in that sense. But what we've tried to do is really to provide a technology that allows us to get in touch with the community, establish a trust, so as to ensure that if you travel, for example, to Japan, don't speak the language, don't know the host, I still have the trust because I've read a review that states and confirms that the accommodation is great, the host is great, the neighborhood is great. We're the platform, but what actually takes place in the community, i.e. in the encounter between the host and the guest, i.e. the moment when the door opens for the first time and people meet each other. Those are encounters that probably wouldn't take place otherwise. What is your competitive edge in this sense vis-à-vis other numerous accommodation portals that we have, for example, here in Germany? I wouldn't say that we're better. I think we have a different focus. And as you quite rightly pointed out, the host and the guest are at the very center of our focus. And that's why we speak of a community of hosts and guests the world over that we're trying to create. And that makes it very, very intimate in a way, and also very, very special. Because if I am accommodated by somebody, visit somebody, enter their home, then I get to know about them, and I establish a relationship that is very, very personal, very intimate in a way. A contact is established that wouldn't be possible in any other form of accommodation. So it's the authenticity and the great diversity that we have on this platform, and the fact that you can get into touch if you want to get into touch with the host. So that's the difference. We're trying to establish a community. Mr. Giga, do you see it? Do you agree with that? Is this a kind of a, if this something that is good for Berlin? This getting in touch with the host, is that an enriching experience? Well, the host, of course, the entire city is a host. I think that's one of the strong sides of Berlin. That's why people flock to Berlin, because Berlin is a very open, tolerant city that welcomes everyone, and that doesn't confront you immediately with bans and prohibitions. That's what makes it so attractive. I think you've been very, very clever about the way that you've set it up, and something that's very, very fascinating. The way you speak about it is almost as if you were engaged in some kind of a social activity. At the same time, Airbnb is trying to make money, so there is a clear business prerogative there. Well, our former president once said that. Of course, we're a company that holds itself against values, but of course, the bottom line has to be right, too, because otherwise the values cannot survive, the business cannot survive. Of course, it is a business, but it is a business that is underpinned by a very strong set of values, and that sets great store by this community that we set up. And Berlin is obviously a paragon of authenticity in that sense, and that is due to recent and less recent history. But that is also the reason why Berlin is extremely sought on Airbnb, because the experiences that you can make here in Berlin, the creative community, the tech community, the various neighborhoods that exist here, all of that is very exciting, very appealing. And Berlin has a lot, and Airbnb has made a huge contribution to tourism development in Berlin, rising up to the rank of one of the 3 most sought-after tourist destinations in Europe. Doesn't come just by coincidence, and Airbnb has played a major role in making that possible. The appealing part is that we live like a local, and very often when we travel, we're no longer sitting in a bus on a guided tour. We're not interested in that anymore. When we travel, we try to encounter the other and understand the other. And I think Airbnb are very well set up to provide that. And you just said that yourself. Authenticity has to be safeguarded. We need to make sure that the city remains authentic. And that brings me to questions of striking the right balance. And I think that Airbnb is also expanding great thought about that, and we're in constant dialogue about this. The question of the balance, or of striking the right balance, is if you have a very successful system that really caters to the demands and the wishes of the people, and if that success becomes so expansive that it starts competing with the housing demand of the locals, because very often you have locals who own apartments that don't rent them out anymore, but rent them via Airbnb. And that leads to a competitive situation, which is detrimental. We do need to make sure that Berlin doesn't become some kind of Disneyland that is dominated by Airbnb with no locals anymore. And we believe that with a strong partnership with the city and its tourism authority, that this is the right way, that we are on the right path towards striking that balance and making sure that on the one hand side there is the home share that does not have a detrimental effect on the housing space that exists, and on the other hand we also have the commercial outfits that look towards having 100% occupancy, but also meet the entire set of regulations. And there shouldn't be any wiggling space between that, or any room in between that, or empty space between that. We can only achieve this balance with a right type of partnership, using the right set of criteria. And we're increasingly moving in that direction, because we want to maintain that partnership in a dialogue and want to move in lockstep, making sure that tourism, and we're one provider within that area, that this tourism that we contribute to goes in the right direction in Berlin. I think we're on the right path. I'd just like to come in at this point. You've had a very, very passionate debate here in Berlin Also, in other European cities, there is a new law against the misappropriation of space in that sense. And 60 days is the new benchmark that separates private use from commercial use. How do you see it? I mean, it's a very political question, but the protection of housing space is the topic that, or is the main premise in terms of the political view, but Airbnb says that they don't want to compete with housing. How do you see it? Well, tourism is the most important economic factor here in Berlin, and quite a large number of people in the city depend on that. We have a turnover of 12.8 billion in that sense. And in order to make sure that Berlin remains attractive, we need to strike a balance. And we need to ensure that the acceptance with regards to tourists is maintained. And if people in Berlin that are anyway under pressure, this city is growing in terms of number. 40,000 new citizens join the ranks here every year. So the housing market is anyway very much under pressure. And then we have this very, very good business model that says, well, we're also entering that same real estate market, and we're also going to be we're also going to be occupying more of that housing space. So that might lead to a situation where people in the city are increasingly under pressure. And therefore, together with politicians, we need to find a form of regulation, a balance that ensures that the locals are not put under pressure when it comes to their vested interests or vital interests. I think that is the key to come to an understanding. Well, when it comes to the reduction of housing space, that's something that we do take very serious. We are probably not the major factor in terms of reduction of housing space. We have 40 to 60,000 people that swell the ranks of the citizens in this city every year. So our principle is to look at it in terms of a partnership, to see what we can do as a tourism provider, see that the surface that is available both for housing and for tourism, and the value creation should really go to the host, i.e. the typical citizen of Berlin. So the house sharing system is the most efficient way of combining tourism and housing, but there are other levers that are much, much larger. For example, the new construction of housing space, that should not be neglected. Are you both satisfied with this compromise, Berlin 60 days? Would that be a precedent for other cities? Is that something that is good, or something that could be emulated by other, as an example, by other cities? Well, Airbnb certainly has to struggle with this issue in many other cities. We're only a very small part of their market, and we can see what type of regulations have been adopted in other cities, what kind of effects have already taken hold. Just to name one, Barcelona, or my dear friend Franz from Amsterdam is also here, where the typical city canal side houses are more and more occupied by Airbnb. It's not good for the industry. It's not good for the city. So we do take note that I don't have my mind fully set on this yet, but it is important to see how much tourism can a city handle. What do we need in order to continue to exist as a city that is open and welcoming for people from all over the world, and to avoid a situation where people in Berlin go down into the street and demonstrate against the situation. We work together with you in a way almost as a kind of a health insurance company in order to prevent a dire situation from really emerging. Well, the law, as it is being debated right now, or the draft law is a step in the right direction. 60 days is set as a threshold limit, and I think that is great because it does provide transparency for everyone. But I don't think that you can look at it only from a single angle here. And the president of the German tourism industry, Dr. Frenz, yesterday quite rightly pointed out that you cannot see it as a general problem. It is a specific problem in some cities, or indeed even in some neighborhoods. And in Berlin, we have 3 large areas that are particularly affected by tourism. Other neighborhoods and boroughs in Berlin would actually yearn to have more tourism. So you need to be specific about it and not talk about it in general terms. You have to look exactly at the kind of flows of visitors and how you can manage these. And if you look at the commercial accommodation landscape, 75% of all overnight stays really are concentrated in Friedrichshain, Kreuzberg, Charlottenburg, and Mitte. And the question is, how can you somehow defuse the situation? If you look at Airbnb, you see that only 50% of all overnight stays really take place in these 3 areas. We have strong growth rates in all other boroughs. And we adopt measures actively in order to see how we can redirect flows of visitors, buzzword being experience and particular experiences, so as to avoid this kind of concentration of mass tourism in these 3 areas. One size all is not something that is really desirable, because that would be detrimental to this unique Berlin experience.
I think we can always quarrel about this. We can talk about this all the time. But I have to agree, the main topic is digitization. All cities are lagging behind. We need to catch up with regard to digitization. We know exactly who's visiting us, but we lose people at the board of the city. We don't know what they do in the city, or we just know roughly. And we don't know someone who goes there, goes over there. I'm not talking about data protection. It's not about finding out everything about people, but I think it's important to understand the ants' roots. I would like to call it like this. We would like to also maybe shift the journeys of the people and tell them, look, you can have a look at this or that monument, etc. This is what we're doing together with the Senate. We've drafted a tourism concept for the city. This is just preventive, so as to make sure that problems will not even pop up. And there, it's important to distribute people, especially those visitors who come for the second, third time. Those who come for the first time, they obviously want to go to the Brandenburg Gate, but would like to provide new services for these visitors who come back. And this is something that will happen in next years. What do? You call it the ants routes, but this is what the customers want already. That is, you've got a guide of his or her trust, and you describe journeys which are off the trodden path, so they don't go on a river cruise, for instance. In any case, there seems to be a demand, even if you don't like it. But well, I studied experiences as well, and there are a lot of standard offers also included that you get anywhere else as well. But also, this includes interesting things. In Lombardy, for instance, if you book there, you can book a man with his dog to go and look for truffles. Very interesting indeed. I'd like to do that. This is something that you can compare to what we try to offer as well. And we'll simply try to give consultation to the districts, to provide them with tourist information. A lot of them are not even aware of this. They want to get more tourists in their boroughs, but they don't know what to do about it. And we would like to help them in doing that. There are also several cultural offerings, monuments, etc., and we try to promote them in a digital way, together with you, together with the hotels which are very active as well. We try to give this information to customers. Let me just give you one example. In autumn 2018, we will introduce something new in Berlin. It's called Path of the Freedom. This is the working title. There are more than 250 locations in Berlin which will be included in a list. These locations are linked to the battle, the struggle for freedom, the fight against dictatorship and against suppression. And I believe that this will make tourists go to the suburbs, or in any case to the places not close to the city centre. And this is something you won't find in travel guides. Sounds good. So kind of a travel guide, you focus on the travel guide and not only on the content, the product? You mean the human aspect? Yes, I'd like to book the travel guide who corresponds to my preferences, who got the right reviews and rankings. This is what you do with experiences. Well, we've got it with experiences. You can find it on Visit Berlin. You've got a Croatian tour guide that you need who gives you information on architecture on the 1920s. You will find these people on our site. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to involve you once again. We've got a question for you, which is the following one. You can use your device again to answer the question. The question is, what about your travel behavior? Has it changed, and how has it changed because of home sharing and Airbnb? Now, let us ask the technicians whether we can get the slide. So has your travel behavior changed as a result of Airbnb? And I'm looking forward to your answer.
Dramatische Musik.
Dramatic music. 43% say yes, it has changed. 30% say no, and 27% say not yet. Maybe later, if I can translate it like this. Strong figures. Doesn't mean that 43% of the people only book via Airbnb, but it gives you a different perspective. Apparently, there's a different flow of demand. I hope that we've broached the right subjects already, services, etc. But once again, to you, Mr. Kicker, you're also in close touch with the established players, such as hotel owners. What do you tell them? Can they improve things at all, or what could they change? Well, during times of radical digital change, you need to question yourself on a weekly basis. Even if you don't do this, you kind of lost out. But the hotels haven't, because they ask themselves these questions. Let me just give you one example. I suppose others do this as well. Acker, for instance, tries to open its hotels so as to get more in touch with the neighborhood. So you can go to the closest Acker hotel, you can put your parcel there or receive packages there. These are reactions not only to Airbnb but to the digital change, and also reactions to a completely different attitude. I think it's a positive one. I think that digital issues result in a pressure on everybody to change things. And Airbnb is one of the drivers doing it quite well, but we'll see many more surprises also with regard to hotels. Something I'm always interested in is families with children. And there we need better offers for these families, for instance. So I'm not really worried that Airbnb will gobble up hotels. I do not have this sorrow. I already expressed my personal concern. I'm wondering whether we shouldn't be careful that the model is that successful that it will gobble up or eat the cities. Last week, Mr. Schwartz, you had a major Airbnb event in America. You introduced 4 new product categories. From my point of view, you offer everything apart from hotels with a USP. I don't know whether this is a joke, but actually you can book everything through. Is that right? Well, we had a major product launch because we announced our 10-year strategy. So we announced what will happen in the next 10 years. And this focuses on a possibility for every traveler to get the right services and to have easy access to find things easily. And one category that we have added, actually several categories have been added. One is boutique hotels. And I think this is linked to what you were expressing. So far, we've had 3 categories. The entire flat, private room or shared room, but now we add 4 more. That's a holiday flat or holiday house close to the coast, boutique hotels, and or bed and breakfast, And something else we have had on the platform for a long time, but it was difficult to find, although everybody wanted to find it, was special accommodations such as igloos or tree houses and other things. So all these things that you are looking for in terms of unique content on our website. And boutique hotels is one sector which has grown good organically. We've got 24,000 accommodation, although we only said last year that we want to have boutique hotels on the platform. And we also like it because it subscribes to a specific form of traveling. That is, they also tell stories at the same time, and they give access to genuine stories. A lot of boutique hotels and family-run hotels provide this feeling, and the family-run and boutique hotels then also reflect that this works very well for these owners, and this is why they like using Airbnb. So an opening process is taking place there. At the end of the day, we're a platform which bangs on this idea of community, and boutique hotels now have gained a foothold in this community. But will Airbnb become a normal OTA, maybe with some sort of a hipster element? Well, I believe that the decisive differentiating factor is the community. That is, the host and the guest are still the focal points. And the 10-year strategy, which was published by Brian, our CEO, clearly pointed this out. We've got the Super Plus program, which we enhanced even further. Now we've got 14 categories altogether. We've got the explicit super hosts, that is those who create particularly good experiences in travelers, and this has received incentives. Then on the other side, we've got the incentive guests. They are characterized by looking for this contact, for instance, and they could get very good feedback. And there again, we focus on the community. But can the host do this? Let us not only talk about Berlin. Let's suppose there's a holiday flat close to the sea, or there's a mountain hut. Can these hosts play the role they do in a sharing flat? Absolutely, they can do that. From my personal experience, I can say that this is very versatile. There is a scenario according to which the host is not to be found in the accommodation, but usually the host comes from the location. He or she knows the infrastructure, the story of the location, the village, the town. Sometimes I needed medical consultation in the middle of the night during the weekend, and I got this from my host. This was a case in a holiday flat close to the coastline, for instance. And then there are the administrators. They can provide you with advice on what places you need to see, or they tell you, if you need help, please phone me up directly. So this is possible, but it becomes more visible thanks to our technology, thanks to our review system, the feedback that you give as a traveler, and other travels then have the possibility to use this advice. Well, maybe the hotel should also provide the image of the hotel owner, that is your host, as a caption. Question to you both, gentlemen. You mentioned OTA. Will Airbnb become an OTA? We heard the answer. Next question. What about Airbnb? Will it become kind of a tourism information and become a competitor for Visit Berlin? Yes, we like this because you help us in our job, thanks to what you do, just like with the hotel concierge. So we don't think that we are competitors. No, you help us to make the city known around the world. Just like hotels do, you've got this site, so you give a very good insight into what you can experience in the city if you go there. I'd like to say something else. I think we, the cities, we need to prepare ourselves for one thing. Cities just as like Amsterdam, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo are focal points of culture, and we've got these travel possibilities, so people come to see us. Whether individual neighborhoods then will say we would like to have it this way or that way, it will not play a role any longer. And I think this hospitality and open-mindedness and the showcase function needs to be embedded in the DNA of the cities. I've got the impression that in some cities this is still difficult. It might even be difficult in some neighborhoods of Berlin, but we will have to assume this role in the future. What about tourist information? What kind of role will it play? As I said earlier, we've got the core destinations, especially urban destinations. We are looking for strong partnerships with the cities and with the tourist representatives. I don't think it's an either-or question, but it is together that we wish to shape tourism. We would like to increase acceptance, and as you said, it's the focal points of culture to also make people who live there visible. And this most of the time takes place thanks to the personality of the individual providers, ideally by the Berliners in Berlin or the people who live there in Amsterdam and other cities, where we Airbnb, we've got a partnership with the cities. Yes, we've had a constructive and critical dialogue. I would like to thank you, Mr. Kieker, Mr. Schwarz, and ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.